He was mid-sentence, holding a glass of champagne, telling a room full of people how he built the company. I was standing 6 feet away, watching him. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I just smiled, sipped my drink, and thought about the folder sitting in my attorney's office, the one with his name on it, not as a partner, as a defendant. That night, at what was supposed to be a celebration of our first major investor meeting, my brother Marcus stood in the center of that rented rooftop venue and wrote history in real time. He talked about his vision, his sacrifice, his late nights building something from nothing. He looked people in the eye and said, when he meant, he stole from someone who trusted him completely. And I let him, because I had already decided, 3 weeks earlier, that the most dangerous thing I could do was let Marcus believe he was winning. What you need to understand is that by the night of that investor party, I had already seen everything. Every secret conversation, every vendor promise made behind my back, every document he tried to quietly restructure with my name moved slightly further from the center. I knew, and he had absolutely no idea that I knew. There was someone else in that room at the investor party. Someone Marcus had spoken to dozens of times, given orders to, dismissed without a second thought. Someone Marcus considered so invisible, so beneath his level of concern, that he had once made a sensitive phone call standing 3 feet away from them. That person had been writing things down for 4 months before I ever asked them to. 8 months after Marcus smiled at me across that partnership signing table. A smile I now understand was the smile of someone who thought they had already won. His name was removed from every document, every filing, every registered asset, and every active contract our company had ever produced. He didn't see it coming, not even on the last day. That is the part one wants you to understand most. He genuinely did not see it coming. And this is exactly how that happened. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning, not the moment everything exploded, the quiet beginning. The kind that doesn't feel significant until years later when you're sitting across from an attorney and she says, "You actually documented this from the start." That is extremely rare and extremely useful. 3 years before the partnership signing, I built the company alone. Not alone, the way people say it when they mean they had some help, but don't want to share credit. Alone as in, I was the only person in a one-bedroom apartment at 2 in the morning designing the client acquisition system that would eventually bring in our first $200,000 in annual contracts. Alone as in, I maxed out a personal credit card twice before the business generated a single dollar in revenue. Alone as in, Marcus didn't even know the company existed until it started showing up in industry conversations. Then he knew about it. Suddenly, he was very interested. I want to be precise about this moment because I think it matters. Marcus didn't approach me out of family loyalty or genuine belief in what I was building. He approached me after a mutual contact told him, at a dinner I wasn't invited to, that my company had just been mentioned in a trade publication as one to watch. The next morning, Marcus called me. First time in 4 months. He said he'd been thinking about me, said he wanted to catch up, said it felt like we drifted and family shouldn't drift. I believed him. I am not ashamed to admit that I believed him because he was my brother and because I was still young enough to think that shared blood meant shared loyalty. I invited him to the office, a real office by then, small but legitimate, and I showed him everything. The systems, the client pipeline, the projection, the vision I had spent 3 years building alone in rooms where nobody was watching. Marcus sat across from me at that meeting table and said, "This is incredible. I want in. I want to help you take this to the next level. I have connections you don't have. I have a way of talking to people that opens doors. We'd be unstoppable together." He wasn't wrong about his ability to open doors. That part was real. Everything else was a performance. What Marcus did not know, what he could not have known, was that the most important person in that meeting was not him. It was not me. It was the quiet woman sitting at the corner desk by the window, pretending to review invoices, who heard every single word he said. Her name was Diana. She had worked for me for 14 months at that point. Office manager, systems coordinator, the person who knew where every file lived and every client relationship stood. She was in the language Marcus would later use to dismiss her. Just the admin. Diana heard that entire conversation. She didn't say a word about it to me until much later, but she heard it. And something about it made her quietly open a new folder on her desktop, a personal one, encrypted, backed up to a private server, and begin typing notes. She would continue adding to that folder for the next 8 months. The partnership was formalized 6 weeks after that first meeting. I want to be clear about what the agreement actually said, not what Marcus later claimed it said. The agreement gave Marcus a 30% equity stake in exchange for specific deliverables, client introductions within the first 90 days, a defined role in business development, and a commitment to a monthly retainer structure that would convert to salary only after the company crossed a specific revenue threshold. He signed it. I signed it. Our attorney filed it. Marcus walked out of that attorney's office and immediately began referring to himself as co-founder, not business development partner, not minority stakeholder, co-founder. Within 2 weeks, he had updated his LinkedIn profile. Within a month, he was taking client calls and introducing himself as one of the founders. Within 6 weeks, he had scheduled a meeting with a vendor I had a 3-year relationship with, presented himself as the primary decision maker, and negotiated a revised contract that gave him a separate consulting fee paid directly to an LLC I had never heard of. I didn't know about that vendor meeting for another 11 weeks, but Diana knew about it within 48 hours. Because here is the thing about Marcus that he never understood, that people like Marcus never understand. When you are so focused on managing the person at the top, you completely stop paying attention to the people in the middle, the people who answer the phones, the people who process the invoices, the people who have the vendor login credentials and the filing system passwords and the institutional memory of every deal ever made. Marcus walked past Diana's desk every single day and saw nobody important. Diana watched Marcus every single day and saw everything. I want to tell you when I first understood what was happening. Not suspected, understood. With the cold clarity that changes the way you see a person permanently. It was a Tuesday, month 3 of the partnership. I came into the office early, around 7 in the morning, because I had a call with a client in a different time zone. Marcus didn't usually arrive before 9:30, sometimes 10. That morning, Marcus arrived at 7:15. He didn't see my car because I'd parked in a different spot. He walked through the front door, went directly to the small conference room at the back, and made a phone call. The door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen, but the office was quiet and his voice carried, and I heard enough. I heard him tell whoever was on that call that he was running the operation now, and that the original founder was more of a creative type, not really a business operator. I heard him say he had a plan to restructure the equity arrangement before the end of the year. I heard him use the word handle in reference to me in a way that made my stomach go completely still. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and did not move for several minutes. Then I opened my calendar and scheduled a meeting with my attorney for that Friday. I did not tell Marcus about the attorney meeting. I did not change my behavior toward him in any visible way. I did not confront him, did not go cold, did not let anything shift in my face when he walked into the main office 20 minutes later and said, "Good morning," like a man who owned the room. I said, "Good morning" back, and I started paying a different kind of attention to everything. What I discovered over the next 3 weeks, through my attorney, through a forensic accountant she recommended, and through the quiet, extraordinary woman at the corner desk, was far worse than what I had heard through that conference room door. Marcus had approached 2 of our largest clients directly, outside of any formal company communication, and positioned himself as the person they should contact if they ever had concerns about the direction of the business. He had registered a separate business entity, the LLC I mentioned, and had begun routing a small but trackable percentage of consulting revenue through it. He had told at least one vendor that he would be buying out the other partner within the year, and that they should consider him the primary point of contact going forward. He had been doing all of this while shaking my hand at weekly check-in meetings and calling me his partner. The most important piece of information, though, the one that reordered everything, didn't come from my attorney or the accountant. It came from Diana. She requested a private meeting with me on a Thursday afternoon. She closed my office door, sat down, and placed a printed document on my desk. It was 12 pages long. It was organized by date, with timestamps, direct quotes where she had them, and supporting documentation, forwarded emails, photographed notes left in the conference room, a printed log of secondary calls she had observed from the front desk. I looked at the first page, then I looked at her. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked. "Since the day after the partnership meeting," she said. "The one where he told you he wanted to help you take things to the next level. That was 4 months ago." I said. "Yes," she said. "Tina," I said carefully. "Why?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Because I watched him do this to someone else before you." I need to pause here because that sentence, "because I watched him do this to someone else before you," changed the entire shape of what I understood to be happening. I had been thinking of this as a betrayal, a painful, infuriating, deeply personal betrayal by someone I trusted. I had been thinking about protecting my company, removing his equity stake, filing the right paperwork, and moving forward. After Diana said those words, I understood this was something else entirely. This was a pattern. Marcus had done this before. There was another person, somewhere, who had sat in exactly the position I was sitting in. I asked Diana to tell me everything. 4 years earlier, before I had ever started the company, before Marcus had any reason to be interested in what I was building, he had been approached by a childhood friend, a man named Carter, to be a minority partner in a small logistics company. Carter had built it. Carter had the relationships. Carter had done the work. Marcus had the personality and the contacts and the ability to charm a room. And Carter had believed, as I had believed, that this was enough reason to trust him with a stake in something real. Within 18 months, Marcus had leveraged his vendor relationships to route contracts through a side entity, had convinced two of Carter's key employees to give him operational access he wasn't entitled to, and had used that access to initiate a legal challenge to the ownership structure, claiming, with fabricated documentation, that he had contributed more to the founding than the original agreement reflected. Carter had spent 2 years and most of his savings fighting a legal battle he eventually won. But the company never recovered. The clients had been spooked. The staff had been destabilized. The brand had been poisoned by the uncertainty of the dispute. Marcus had walked away with a settlement, a fraction of what he wanted, but more than he deserved, and had spent the next 2 years telling anyone who would listen that he had been the victim of a dishonest partner. Diana had been Carter's office manager before she was mine. She had watched the whole thing happen once. When Marcus walked into my office 3 years later, she had recognized him instantly and understood, before I did, exactly what his presence meant. She had taken the job with me specifically because she liked what I was building. And when Marcus joined the partnership, she had made a decision, quietly and without drama, that she was not going to watch it happen again. Everything I had been doing, the attorney meetings, the forensic accounting, the quiet restructuring of operational access, suddenly had a different weight. I wasn't just protecting a business. I was stopping something that had happened before and would happen again if I didn't end it completely and permanently. I sat with Diana for 2.5 hours that Thursday afternoon. By the time she left my office, I had a plan. Here is where I need to be precise because the precision is what made everything work. I did not confront Marcus. I did not warn him. I did not give him an opportunity to lawyer up, to move assets, to reach out to clients first, to construct a narrative, or to rally the family to his side before I could tell them the truth. I did nothing that looked different from any other week. What I did instead was work backward through everything Diana had documented, verify it with my attorney and the forensic accountant, and then quietly, methodically, surgically begin reclaiming what was mine. The LLC Marcus had used to route the consulting revenue. Diana had its registration documents. She had found them in the recycling bin of the conference room printer on a day Marcus had been careless. She had photographed them with her phone and filed them in her encrypted folder. The vendor contract he had renegotiated without my knowledge. Diana had the original and revised versions, because she managed the vendor relationship on her end and had been CC'd on the preliminary emails before Marcus had asked to be removed from the thread. She had forwarded herself copies the day she received them. The clients he had approached directly with his point of contact positioning. I reached out to each of them personally, framed it as a routine check-in, and discovered that two of them had been confused for months about who was actually running the company. I clarified the situation in those conversations, sent formal written follow-ups on company letterhead, and documented each interaction. The equity restructuring Marcus had been planning. My attorney had already identified 3 specific clauses in the original partnership agreement that Marcus had either misunderstood or chosen to ignore, each of which created conditions under which his stake could be legally challenged. We began preparing that challenge in month 5. Marcus, at this point, was at the height of his confidence. He had started CCing himself on client communications I had not included him in. He had begun speaking at networking events and listing the company as his in his speaker bios. He had hosted a dinner I was not invited to, with 3 investors he had met through the company's connections, during which he had, according to one of those investors who later told me about it directly, described himself as the driving force and me as a technical partner who handles the back end. He was so busy managing his performance that he had no idea the stage was being quietly dismantled around him. Month 6, Diana came to me with something new. Marcus had begun confiding in her. I want you to let that land for a moment. Marcus, who saw Diana as invisible, as just the admin, as someone so irrelevant to his power play that he had once taken a sensitive phone call standing 3 feet from her desk, had begun treating her as a confidant. He would stop by her desk in the late afternoons, lean against the wall, and talk. He told her the company was going to look very different by the end of the year. He told her she shouldn't worry about her position, that good staff would be taken care of. He told her, on one specific afternoon that Diana wrote down verbatim and time-stamped, that the current structure isn't sustainable and I'm working on a solution. He thought he was being reassuring. He thought she was loyal to whoever held the power. He did not know she had been recording those conversations, legally, in a jurisdiction where single-party consent applied, on her phone. He did not know that every word he said in those casual, confident afternoon conversations was going directly into a folder that now contained over 60 pages of documentation. Month 7 was when the ground started to shift in ways Marcus could feel, but couldn't explain. The first thing he noticed was that clients were responding to him differently, not coldly. They were still professional, still polite, but there was a new formality, where they had once returned his calls quickly and engaged with his outreach directly. They were now routing conversations back through me. One client, who Marcus had been cultivating as a personal relationship, stopped accepting his one-on-one lunch invitations and began requesting that I be included in any meetings. Marcus mentioned this to me once, casually, the way someone mentions something that is bothering them, but doesn't want to admit it. Have you noticed the Hendricks account has been a little distant? He said. I haven't noticed anything unusual, I said. I had spoken to the Hendricks account 3 weeks earlier. The second thing Marcus noticed was that he was being left out of internal conversations he had expected to be included in. Vendor calls, operational decisions, the quiet daily business of running a company. This had been happening gradually for weeks, not dramatically, not in a way he could point to and call deliberate, but the cumulative effect was that Marcus was beginning to operate at the periphery of a company he believed he was taking over. He brought it up in one of our weekly check-ins. He said he felt like communication had gotten a little siloed. He said he wanted to make sure he was looped in on everything going forward. I told him absolutely, completely. I wanted us to be fully aligned. And then, in month 7's third week, I had a conversation with every single member of our small staff, 5 people, including Diana, that Marcus was not present for and did not know about. I told them the truth about what was happening, not a dramatized version, the documented version. I showed them the forensic accounting summary. I showed them the LLC registration. I let them read 2 of the audio transcripts Diana had produced. Every one of them already knew something was wrong. Every one of them had a story. A moment where Marcus had said something dismissive, made a promise he had no authority to make, or implied that the company's leadership would look different soon. By the end of those conversations, I had 5 signed witness statements, 5 people who had seen things, heard things, and were willing to say so formally. Marcus came into work the next morning and smiled at everyone, completely unaware that the room had fundamentally changed. His attorney called mine in week 2 of month 8. That was when I knew Marcus had finally felt the walls. The call was framed as routine, just wanting to ensure both parties are aligned on the partnership structure going forward. But the timing was not a coincidence. Something had reached him. Maybe a client had said something. Maybe a vendor had confirmed something. Maybe he had simply felt the silence thickening and understood, the way people understand things they don't want to understand, that the situation was no longer what he thought it was. My attorney called me immediately after. "He's nervous," she said. "He doesn't know what you have. He's trying to figure it out without showing his hand." "Let him," I said. "Do you want to respond to the outreach?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Let him wait." He waited for 11 days. Then his attorney called again. The meeting happened on a Wednesday morning. Conference room. My attorney, the forensic accountant, Marcus, and his attorney. Marcus walked in looking controlled. He had dressed carefully, the kind of careful that signals someone who spent time in front of the mirror that morning rehearsing their expression. He sat down across from me, made brief eye contact, and looked away first. I had been waiting for 8 months for that moment, and I want to be honest with you. It was not satisfying the way I had imagined it would be. It was quieter than that. There was something almost sad about watching someone walk into a room they think they can talk their way out of, when you know with complete certainty they cannot. My attorney opened the folder. The first document was the LLC registration Diana had found in the recycling bin. Marcus's attorney looked at it. Marcus looked at the table. The second document was the forensic accounting summary, 14 pages detailing the revenue that had been routed through the LLC from company adjacent consulting work, totaling, over 8 months, $31,400. Marcus started to speak. His attorney put a hand on his arm. The third set of documents were the 2 vendor contracts, the original and the renegotiated version, showing the terms Marcus had changed without my knowledge and the consulting fee he had arranged for himself. The fourth was a printed transcript of one of Diana's recordings, the one where Marcus had said, "The current structure isn't sustainable, and I'm working on a solution." Marcus looked up from the transcript and, for the first time, scanned the room, I think looking for Diana, understanding suddenly that she had been in this room in some form for months before he arrived. His attorney asked for a 15-minute recess. They came back in 12 minutes. The negotiation that followed lasted 4 hours. I won't walk you through every detail of those 4 hours because most of it was legal mechanics that would bore you, and because the emotional core of it can be summarized simply. Marcus had nothing. He had constructed an elaborate edifice of secret moves, quiet positioning, and social maneuvering, and every single piece of it had been documented, verified, and prepared as a legal exhibit before he walked into that room. His attorney was good. She found every angle she could. She challenged the recording transcripts. She questioned the forensic accounting methodology. She tried to reframe the LLC as a legitimate separate business that had nothing to do with company contracts. Every challenge was met with a counter document. Every reframe was met with a timestamp. Every argument collapsed not because my attorney out-argued his, but because the evidence was simply there, concrete, organized, and overwhelming. By hour 3, Marcus had stopped talking entirely. He sat in that chair with his hands flat on the table and looked somewhere slightly above my shoulder, and I understood that he was doing what people do when the reality of their situation has finally arrived. He was recalculating, not the legal situation, that was already decided. He was recalculating everything, every assumption he had made about me, every conversation he had dismissed. Every moment he walked past Diana's desk without a second glance. He was understanding, for the first time, that the person he had believed was too trusting, too creative, too absorbed in building things to notice what was being done to them, had noticed everything. The settlement agreement was signed on a Thursday morning, 3 days after the Wednesday meeting. Marcus's equity stake was dissolved. The LLC was formally separated from any company connection and required to repay the $31,400 with an additional penalty. His name was removed from the partnership agreement, from the company registration, from every vendor contract, from every client-facing document, and from the website. His LinkedIn profile, which had listed him as co-founder for 7 months, was updated at his attorney's request as a condition of the settlement to remove any reference to the company. The process took 11 business days. I was in the office the morning his access credentials were formally deactivated. Diana was at her desk. I walked over to her and said, "It's done." She nodded. She didn't look particularly triumphant. She looked, if I had to describe it accurately, like someone who had finished something important and was already thinking about what came next. "What happened to Carter?" I asked her. I had been thinking about him throughout the entire process. After it was all over with Marcus, what happened to him? "He rebuilt," Diana said. "It took a long time, but he rebuilt. I'm going to call him," I said. "He'd like that," she said. I told him a little bit about what was happening here. He was rooting for you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I went back to my office, sat down, and opened my email. There were 17 unread messages from clients, vendors, and contacts. 12 of them had been CC'd to Marcus at some point in the last 7 months. Now, for the first time, none of them were. They were just mine. Marcus called me once, about 3 weeks after the settlement was signed. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that I listened to twice and then deleted. It was not an apology, not a real one. It was the kind of message someone leaves when they want to believe they still have some standing in a situation, when they want to leave the door open on terms that serve them. He talked about family. He talked about how things had gotten out of hand. He used the phrase, "I think we both made mistakes," 3 times. I didn't call him back. My mother called me a week after that. Someone, Marcus, presumably, had told her a version of events. Her version of the call was careful and diplomatic, which told me that whatever Marcus had said had not been entirely convincing, even to her. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her no. I told her the situation had been resolved, and I was focused on moving forward. She called Marcus twice after speaking with me. According to what she told me later, he didn't answer either time. The company, without Marcus, grew 34% in the following 6 months. The clients who had been confused about who was in charge became entirely clear on the matter. 3 new vendor relationships, uncontaminated by Marcus's behind-the-scenes interference, were established on clean and well-documented terms. Diana got a raise and a title change, Director of Operations, which she accepted without fanfare and immediately justified in ways that made me wonder how long I had been undervaluing her. Carter, when I called him, turned out to be someone worth knowing. We had a long conversation. He was doing well. He had built something new and smaller, and, he said, healthier than what Marcus had touched. At the end of the call, he said, "I always hoped he would run into someone who was paying attention." Someone was, I said. She was paying attention long before I was. Marcus spent 8 months believing he was invisible to me. He was never invisible. He just had no idea who else was watching.